So this is LeetCode number 4. This is the fourth question in the LeetCode 75 problem set. It's called Can Place Flowers. This is actually one of my favorite ones from one of my favorite easy ones. So to start off, it's weird that they sometimes give you n equals 0 flowers to plant, because if you have 0 to plant, it defaults to true. So you technically should just get rid of this case right off the bat. Um, there's really only two tricks to this one that you have to kind of consider, and so the first one is the the only limit is adjacency. The first and last spot you could almost think of as having zeros on the outside of them, or another way of thinking about it is, so like when I'm counting the zeros, you have to have 3 before you could place a flower in the middle. But on the sides, you only need 2. So like the first spot and the last spot, you technically only need 2 zeros because there's no flower that's to the left of the first one, and there's no flower that's to the right of the last one. So that's the first trick. And then the other trick is that when you plant a flower, and if like you're counting the zeros, you technically can't, you don't reset it to 0 because technically in the current spot that you just added, there's another 0. And so when you resetting the 0 count after you plant a flower, you'd actually reset it to 1. And you can see that right here. But yeah, we'll just go through it. And so I default, so 0 count, I start at 1 because this is, since I'm starting from the left, this takes care of the fact that there's technically an invisible 0 to the left of the first spot. And then planted count, I mean, that's 0 because we haven't planted any. And then I just created a variable for the length of the flower bed. This is the response that will return, and then I'm just looping through. And so the big one that matters is, I'm checking to see if it's 0. Now we can kind of deal with this part first. And so if it's not 0, and in this case it'd only be a 1, as soon as you encounter a 1, you have to reset the 0 count all the way to 0, because now the next spot is adjacent to a flower. And so the interesting part is in here. So when you have a 0, obviously you would add to the 0 count. You'd check to see if you have 3, because if you have 3 consecutive zeros, then you could plant a flower in the middle 0. And so if that's the case, you add 1 to the planted count, and then this is where you reset the 0 count to 1, though, because in the current spot you also have a 0. And so I said that the trick is that in the first spot you only need 2, and in the last spot you only need 2. And so I covered the first spot by defaulting the 0 count to 1, and then this else if is where I check for the last spots. So if 0 count is equal to 2 and you're in the last spot, so I plus 1 is equal to the variable for the length of the flower bed, then you can also plant 1, and that's because the last spot only needs to not have 1 in that spot and the one before it, and there would be no flowers adjacent to it. And so then that's all of it. And then I'm calculating to see if the total amount that I planted is greater than or equal to n, which is how many you were supposed to, and then that changes it to true. Technically speaking, this isn't as efficient as it should be for this particular question, because really what you should do is every time you plant a flower, you should check and see if that planted amount was equal to n, and then just quit as soon as possible to speed it up. What I technically did was I calculated the maximum number of flowers that you could plant, and then just at the end check to see if it was greater than or equal to n. Again, I think this way is more fun, but if you were doing it on an interview, you'd obviously just do whatever's optimal. And so that would be every time you plant a flower, you would just check to see if the planted count is equal to n, and then if it does, you just return true. But this one is one of my favorite easy ones, and so hopefully if you were struggling with this helps. We'll run it real quick. Or real slow. Yeah, it's all over the place, because sometimes with the same ones I'll get like 95s, 95, and then it'll be 10 and 10, so I don't really worry about these too much, as long as I'm solving the problem and I'm not doing something that's like drastically wrong compared to like the optimal solution. I don't really care about LeetCode's metrics. hopefully this helps though.